Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome, friend, to the Delingpole podcast with me, your friend, James Delingpole. I am so excited, as I always am, of course, about this week's very special guest, who is none other than my brother, Dick Delingpole, making a return appearance. Welcome, Dick.
I thought we'd agreed that I wasn't going to be a very special guest. I was just going to be the one and only one who got called just guest, allowing the other guest to become special.
Yeah. Can I rescind that special guest, and you are just the guest.
Just the guest.
Can I say, Dick, that even though some people ask me which is my favourite podcast, and I say all my podcasts are my children, I love them all equally. But if I'm really, really honest, the podcasts I enjoy doing most, and we've had some bloody interesting people, haven't we, in the last few weeks?
Absolutely, yeah.
You can tell me maybe what your favourites are in a moment, but I have to say that I like doing the ones with you best. A, because I know you reasonably well, so we know where we are, we can just do the bants and stuff. And B, we don't have to talk about pure politics. It can sneak in.
You don't want to talk about my latest book?
Oh, what's that called?
Well, no, you see, this is what we haven't got. Because I'm not special, I haven't actually got a thing that is me that we have to cover, basically. I haven't got a book out, I'm not running for Parliament, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, but can we just briefly contextualise this particular interview and saying
so should.
It is Easter Sunday. We are at James's house, we're in his study. We had a lovely walk with our respective families and dogs yesterday.
We didn't go to church, though.
We didn't go to church. We heard the bells ringing almost accusatorily. Is that a word?
Yeah, that is a good word. Well done, Dick. You probably don't care. I do actually feel bad about not having gone to church at Easter because I think it is the most important date in the Christian calendar, and I do feel it's sort of, even though I'm not a mega God botherer, I do actually like the Anglican traditions, and I do like the ritual of the Easter service.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of with you there, but good luck with getting our kids to go. You know, it was enough to extract them from that party last night. Just to continue the contextualization, we attended a rather fantastic party last night with one of your former podcast guests, funnily enough,
with Gary Bell, and the reason it was a good party rather is because they had cocktails. They had margaritas.
Boy, did they have cocktails! These were absolute killer margaritas. There was barely anything other than tequila in them.
Well, tequila
apart from the Cointreau,
triple sec order, Cointreau, exactly. I think had we carried on drinking, it would have got very,
you wouldn't be
very
getting
messy.
This podcast now.
No, I mean, I've got a hangover anyway, slightly. I don't know about you.
No, I'm pretty all right. Better than I can say for my dear daughter, who won the award for drunkest person at the party.
Yeah. It's awful, isn't it, as a parent, watching your children do the terrible things that you used to do.
Yeah, this is why we had to leave them and come back and collect them later in a Black Hawk Down style operation. We were ninja.
It was exactly like Black Hawk Down. We had to turn up in a car and extract them.
Delta Force.
It felt like we were being shot at from all directions.
I don't think I was imagining it, no.
No. And we got them out.
So that's the context, and now we find ourselves in a situation trying to steal an hour away from our families.
From the bloody wives!
Who are saying, well, the potatoes aren't going to peel themselves, you know. And Dick, you are doing the potatoes because you're best at it. How long do they need?
Yeah.
Oh, well, at least an hour and a half. Well, how are you going to do the podcast? So
yeah,
there you have the context.
The thing I didn't like was the way that the podcast was made out to be a kind of...
The bad guy in this.
Yeah. An indulgence that stupid James wanted to do because it's one of his stupid things that he does. Like, hello, this is part of my job. How can I not be allowed to do a work thing?
But you know, it's Easter Sunday. It is kind of naughty, but you know, Easter egg hunts can be done any time.
I once got a huge wife bollocking because Steve Bannon emailed me on Easter Sunday to ask me to do some kind of article for Breitbart, which I did because you don't say no to Steve Bannon.
You do that sort of thing.
But I think the wife definitely did rather object to the kind of American style work practices creeping into our lives. And we were discussing this earlier. We are not the kind of people who like working 24/7, like being called by the boss. It's just not our way. But there we are. That's why we're unemployable.
Absolutely. So we are now into the notebook. As you noted last time, I've actually made notes since our last podcast for potential things that we can talk about. And there's the yes-no game, which proved very popular last time, which I think we should do. Various other topics which I've hinted at, but I haven't given you chapter and verse on, so it gives us an opportunity.
I think we want to keep it fresh, keep it real. Yeah,
well, if I pre-warn you on these things, and let me assure you, dear listener, that he's not pre-primed on these things, so it is...
Then my reaction is just going to be like, what? WTF? Yeah. I might go. I might expostulate even.
But clearly, before we've done this, we've had conversations for the last 24 hours, and just a sort of brotherly catch up. So let's go into the yes no. Are you ready for some yes no?
Sorry, I'm just checking that the bloody thing is actually recording, because God, it's terrifying. Do you know what? One thing I want when this podcast really takes off.
A proper podcast.
I
recorder.
want a sodding engineer to do this shit for me. I'm the talent. Why should I have to do the technical stuff as well?
It's almost like having to typeset your own essays.
It is a bit like that. I mean, I'm sure. Do you think Adam Buxton does his own technical stuff?
No, I think he's got some technical whiz behind him. Yeah.
Has he?
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I want.
Although he is very apt at the
he is
because he does his own music stuff and he tinkers a lot, so he knows his way around a Mac.
Yeah, that's never been said of me.
No.
Okay, so on to your thing.
Right. So we know you know the form. I give you a list of names one by one, and all you have to answer is yes or no.
Okay.
So let's kick off with an easy one, and then see what you make of it. Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
Michael Caine.
Yes.
Theresa May.
No.
Nigella.
Yes.
Russell Grant.
Oh, yes.
Russell Brand.
No.
Noel Fielding.
Nah.
Richard Ayoade.
No.
Judge Dredd.
Yes.
Judge Rinder.
Judge Rinderpest, yes.
Vince Vaughn.
Oh, this is a reference to the Oscars when he kind of didn't respond to Meryl Streep's plea that everyone should hate Donald Trump.
That's when I was taking these notes. It dates it immediately. And Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson, yes.
Okay, here's another list. Prince Charles.
No.
Prince Philip.
Yes.
Prince Harry.
Yes.
Prince William.
Yeah, I don't like the animal rights stuff that they're doing. There's a bit of chip off the old block stuff coming out.
That's what worries me about that one. Yeah.
I mean, we like Harry because he's seen service in Afghanistan.
Looks good behind a heavy machine gun.
We get sympathy vote because he's a ginger, and he's kind of cool. But I do worry about the Prince Charles factor.
So Prince William, Prince.
He's a girl's idea of a rock musician. I'm sorry he's dead, but no.
Will.i.am.
I'd like him if I didn't know what his politics were, so I'm saying no.
Winona Ryder.
I like her because she appears in a John Grant film, and also because she was in what's that film?
Beetlejuice.
No. What's the
Stranger Things.
Stranger Things.
That's why she's here.
She's definitely a yes.
Yeah, and she's a bit nuts.
Yeah.
Finally, there's Mike Oldfield.
Yes.
And Richard Branson.
No.
Well done. I think actually you scored full points.
That's my
one,
free flights on Virgin Airlines. But
I don't think there's any danger of that happening.
Right. Okay.
So we're probably up to a 20-minute, aren't we?
No, we're not.
No,
so
really?
We're only 10 minutes in.
Well, my word, we've got so much to get through then. So yesterday we were talking about the very worst person on the internet.
Yeah.
And do you even want to name him? Because all our Twitter followers will know who he is. But you can name him or just give his handle.
Graham Linehan.
Yeah.
Graham Linehan. It's probably some Irish pronunciation. Linehan. Yeah. Graham Linehan. Yeah. He is. It's not even a competition, is it? He is just literally the worst person on the internet.
The worst thing on the internet.
The worst thing on the
possibly.
internet. Yeah. And you think of the competition he's got like World War II, the Holocaust,
Hitler.
the rape of Nanking,
Yep.
Mao,
Pol Pot,
ISIS,
a lot of competition.
Genghis
Genghis
Khan.
Khan, the
How
Black
did-
Death.
How did Graham Linehan manage to be so much worse than any of these awful things?
Well, the extraordinary thing is his genius as a comedy writer. No matter how much you hate him, it is kind of undeniable. He wrote Father Ted, he wrote the IT Crowd, various other things, Big Train, things we like that not everyone would have seen. So,
Well, whatever else, we can definitely give him Father Ted. It is a bit like the Wagner thing, isn't it? Possibly. I mean, I'm not a particular Wagner fan, but lots of people I know are. Well, Michael Gove. And Wagner, people say, great artist, terrible person. I'm not saying that Graham Linehan is a Nazi, because he thinks everyone else is a Nazi.
yeah, everyone
so
else is a Nazi.
He can't
Everything
be
he doesn't like is a Nazi.
Everything he doesn't.
I mean, Hitler himself painted some lovely postcards. How do you square that with what he ended up doing? Talented painter of postcards, and yet he all that unpleasantness.
Actually, what I don't understand about Graham Linehan, I don't understand how somebody who could create something as joyous and apolitical as Father Ted.
It is apolitical, isn't it? There's not a hint of politics in there.
No, it's just really, really funny. How can somebody like that be so joyless in real life? I mean, you would think a comedian or a comic writer on Twitter would have one job: to be funny.
You go on his timeline and have a look back through some of his tweets. It's bitterness, vitriol, spite, trying to just bring down the people he hates. All his followers are saying, Graham, look at this I've just found. Someone's
That's the
being
worst
right
thing.
wing on Twitter.
People gobbling on
And
Graham's relief.
I fell victim to that recently. He actually unblocked me just so he could have a laugh at me, and it was really quite pathetic. He was claiming, I'm not a real person, I'm just you with a stick-on moustache.
Which he's got lots of followers.
No, it's horrible. It's nasty, kind of like gather round and throw stones at the person who hasn't got as many followers as you kind of thing.
There is certainly a problem with many comedians is that they seem to put all their humour into their writing or their stand-up sets, and there's none left for real life. I'm sure there are exceptions to this rule, but
well, look, that leads quite nicely onto something else I took the trouble to write down here. You know, I'm a big fan of Adam Buxton and his podcast. Well, I listened to his podcast when he interviews Steve Coogan. Again, another undeniably talented comic.
yes. Well, hang on. For American listeners, for American friend might not have heard of Steve Coogan. Where might they have seen?
Well, at the moment, he's got a very popular, is it called The Trip? And I think that's going over to the States, where he and a fellow comedian,
Rob Brydon,
make a road trip and go to restaurants and enjoy meals and talk. It's just lad banter. It's actually acted, but the two parts they play are so close to their real personalities as makes no difference, and it's a lovely format and it really kind of works. But I think that's going over to the States, so they might have seen that. They might know him as Alan Partridge if they're really into their obscure Brit humour.
Yes, I like the film he did about Manchester.
24-Hour Party People. Yeah, that was very good.
That was good.
Yeah. So, he's worth looking into. He started off doing voices for Spitting Image, I believe. That was his...
Oh, right.
So, anyway, his podcast with Adam Buxton, they get talking about why is it that comedians are left-wing. And he comes out with this quote. This is Steve Coogan. He says, "In terms of popular culture and modern creativity, it is all left of centre. If you are truly artistic and have a humanity about what you do... ... it's very difficult to embrace humanity and be right wing."
That is. I think we should pause to reflect on that, because it is so true. The only people who care about humanity are left-wing people. Right-wing people are evil, Dick, and I'm amazed that you even. Do you know what? It disgusts me that you read out that quote in inverted commas, like
as if
were,
I was judging it as potentially having an element of untruth to it.
Yes. Isn't it extraordinary that the arrogance? I would have thought that in order to write comic scripts and to perform, you've got to have some understanding of the world and of human nature. But to come out with something so arrogant and something so what's the word I'm looking for? Just wankerish. Wankerish.
It really is the evidence of a man who has got himself in a lovely little lovey bubble, surrounded himself with yes men, and never actually gets to meet talented, artistic, so-called right-wingers.
I tell you what puzzles me about one example of why I think we should be a bit sniffy about statements like that. Who are just about the biggest tax avoiders in the country? Who are the people who pay the specialist accountants a fortune in order to put their accounts offshore or to join film schemes or whatever in order to protect their vast incomes from the tax man? It's I think maybe even Coogan did one of these.
I think it's partly why they're against that. They're part of that. What was it? Wanked off.
Wanked off. Yeah. Hacked off.
Hacked off. That was the one. It was Hugh Grant I was confusing that with. But that's why they're part of that, because they want their privacy, of course. Yeah. Because otherwise we'd find out how little tax they actually end up paying.
But not that we're accusing them of doing anything illegal here, because tax avoidance, after all, is legal. But for people who preach about
that's the fatal combination, isn't it? Doing it and then lording it over anyone they see to be doing it. It's double standard. If Jim
Nick Davidson wants to avoid tax, that's fine, because he's never talking about the joys of big government. He's never arguing that personally I'd pay more tax if it went into the NHS. This kind of stuff that they come up with all the time. They are great believers in the state, aren't they? The benign state which spends our tax money on important causes like the poor, like social justice, all the things that they advocate. Yet when push comes to shove, they don't want to put their money where their mouth is. And that, I think, makes them something ending in unts and beginning with C, really.
So I think we've covered off that whole comedy has to be left-wing thing. I mean, it's a rich topic, because...
we can return to it. We can return to it.
I mean, we can name the comedians that we know who are right-leaning on the fingers of one frostbitten hand.
Well, but if we, I don't want to mess up their career.
No, you'd be outing them.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that we haven't mentioned, that the whole ecosystem of comedy, of indeed showbiz, is a left-wing ecosystem. And if you are right-wing, if you are noticeably right-wing, you don't get the work. I mean, we know people there are exceptions in Hollywood, like James Woods, for example, real James Woods, but they stick out like a sore thumb. I had a conversation the other day with our other brother,
the talented one,
the mystery brother who would probably never appear on this show. I went out to visit one of his offices in a far-off land, and I was talking to one of his senior right-hand men, a guy he'd worked with at JP Morgan or somewhere. And it became this guy was Irish, and it became pretty clear when we started talking about politics that this guy couldn't have been further away from where I am. So he believed, for example, in clean energy.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah, that thing. Because he'd worked for a hedge fund which had invested in renewables.
Hedge funds would know all about clean energy, wouldn't they?
Exactly. And, of course, he genuinely believed in all that kind of cisgender bollocks and all the SJW, social justice warrior stuff. And I said to him, look, let's agree to differ. But here's the thing. You have never in your life had to question your politics, because people on the left they're not required to do so. If you're left-wing, it automatically means you're a nice, caring guy, which makes it so much easier for you. You can get on with the business of doing your business. It's career safe for you to be on the left. Whereas for some of us, those of us on the right, we have to constantly defend our position. And unless you believe in this stuff, it's very, very exhausting.
Yeah, no, it's like being a black conservative, actually. You've got to constantly admire those. We have maximum respect.
Thomas Sowell is my god.
it would be so much easier for them to play the victim card and get through life sort of as the good guys who are constantly wronged.
I have sometimes, in fact, only the other day, I wished I was gay. I know being gay is not very high up in the schemata of left-wing privilege anymore.
No.
But it's better than being
taken a
straight,
bit of a battering
heterosexual
lately.
male. But I was thinking, if I were a lesbian, I'd easily get a job as a BBC sports presenter.
You'd be a good lesbian.
I'd be a bloody good lesbian, and I would be great. I would be either presenting Bake Off or I'd be presenting BBC sports program. I'd be going to the Olympics.
Yep.
Not that I want to do that necessarily, but I would if I could, if I were a lesbian.
Yep. And you wouldn't have to be sat here doing a podcast.
And I could still have sex with women, which would be even better.
Sex with lesbians as well, and we all know that.
No, only in porn videos, Dick.
Well,
in real life, lesbians are not fun to have sex with. I would venture.
I've only ever seen porn lesbians.
I did actually have sex once with a girl who I think was a lesbian, and look, she looked great, but there was not much enthusiasm for it.
I think that tells you everything you need to know. She's definitely a lesbian.
You are listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my guest, my very ordinary guest, Dick Delingpole. More in a moment.
Check out the official Breitbart store today. Store.breitbart.com is the home for the brand new official Breitbart store. Head there now for products for men and women, as well as collectibles like the limited time only Retro 2016 Presidential Coffee Mug or a Breitbart Border Patrol Koozie. Store.breitbart.com has these items and many more. So get your gear now at store.breitbart.com. This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to Delingpole, the podcast with me, James Delingpole, brought to you by Breitbart, with my guest, not my special guest, just my guest, Dick Delingpole. Dick, I was listening to actually, this would be really annoying for people who've listened to it, because they'll notice it now, but I was listening to the recording of the last section we did, and the sound was all off. Can we just make another appeal? I need a studio engineer.
Well, there's a lot of these people about, but trying to get them to come out to rural Northamptonshire would probably be a problem.
That probably is.
I mean, we are way out in the country here. I mean, I'm looking outside to rolling fields and sheep. It is lovely, and of course the lambs are all out at the moment, and it is absolutely gorgeous.
But I do actually go to London to do my podcast, and that's my old podcast that I used to do for Ricochet and stuff. I used to do them on Skype, which is fine, except even when I was doing them with somebody like Toby Young, who I know really well, unless you can see the other person, you can't get the timing right. It's like that delay you get calling people in America.
Yeah, I can see how that would.
Yeah, so it doesn't. It's not the same. So I like to do things in person, and also you bond with people, and it gives me a chance to take them out for lunch and stuff. You're not getting a lunch out of this. You're getting roast. You're getting roast.
And I get to see my family. I mean, it's my nephew and niece as well, and seeing the fawn, and getting the dogs together and all of that. So obviously this has its benefits, but regular listeners will of course be aware of the varying qualities of the sound on your podcasts, and sometimes it's
how annoying is it?
Sometimes it's better than it. You kind of push through it because the content is interesting enough, but it gives it a lovely sort of homespun quality. But that's the best.
Just
can be
tell
said
me
for
how good are my podcasts now?
They are awesome. They're absolute must-hears.
And you're not biased, are you? At all?
Not at all. No.
How many podcasts do you listen to a week? About 1,000, probably.
1,000 a week?
Yeah.
I doubt if I get through that many.
Right. 6?
6, maybe. 6.
Do you?
Yeah. It depends what sort of mood I'm in. Sometimes I do my work constantly listening to podcasts, and there are the go-to ones that I will try. But I tried one the other day. I thought, well, look, there's a whole world of podcasts out there. And if you're on, say, iTunes, and I know a lot of your listeners don't want to listen to your podcast through iTunes for various reasons, but I had a look at some of the favourites along the top. And there's various politics ones. Some of them sell themselves as being funny. There's a lot of football podcasts, which of course I have no interest whatsoever. So I had a listen to a random podcast, and I don't know what it was, but it was rubbish. He launched into it, and of course there's the predictable how terrible is Trump type stuff. And I was thinking, well, how come this guy is one of the top-rated podcasts? So I had a look at the reviews, and of course he's getting all the 5-star reviews that you ask your own listeners to get. And I was thinking, this review thing, are you really going to review anything, be it a meal, a podcast, something you've bought on the internet? Are you going to give it anything less than 5 stars if you liked it? And are you going to give it any more than 1 star if you didn't like it? That middle ground is never actually occupied. No one goes on and gives a 3-star review to something. Because by going through the review process, you're actually taking a leap of faith, you're taking time out of your day to do it. If you get someone to like your podcast, you're going to get 5-star reviews. Basically, you are going to be brilliant or the worst thing ever.
Although some people have given me 4 stars.
They're awkward.
They've
That's a
quibbled.
contrarian thing.
They can...
Maybe it's the sound quality they don't like.
No, they do stupid things. They say like, oh, that one that I did with Phelim McAleer and Anne McElhenney, and they say, oh, we didn't like the scary stuff about babies being
That
killed.
was really, really gruesome, though.
Yeah, but
I don't think it's enough to actually downgrade your rating at all, because it was mind-blowingly interesting and horrific, but it was real. It had happened, and these
Exactly.
guys had uncovered something quite extraordinary.
Yeah. I don't really like people criticising me in any way at all. I think it's quite... No, because they're so wrong, Dick. And I think what you mentioned this earlier. You were gonna talk about reviews online.
Yeah.
And about whether we can trust them.
Well, it's partly down to this sort of TripAdvisor type scenario that's going on, the whole democratization of opinion, whereby everyone's opinion is equal. So you'd no longer necessarily look to a food critic to tell you whether a restaurant was any good.
You want thick people with no taste.
You want thick people with no taste who have given it 5 stars on TripAdvisor. Now, TripAdvisor, it can be a wonderful thing. You can check out where are the good indie cafes to go to in your area and that sort of thing. But basically, you're relying on non-experts for that sort of thing.
Not that we like experts either.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is. No.
Yeah.
I can give you a perfect example of this. Last summer, we went to Sicily, as you do, and we went to Syracuse, and it's this old historic town. In fact, it used to be the biggest city in the world, the most important city in the world, and it has tremendous history and it's quite nice architecturally, but it is a bit of a tourist trap. And we were there looking for somewhere to eat. So naturally, what we tried to do was find the number one place in TripAdvisor that we could go to that wasn't fully booked. Mm-hmm. And we went down the list, and inevitably all the places we want to go to, they were either really small or hadn't got a table. And then we spotted this place which specialised in a local variety of pizza called, I think, something like Pizzolo or something. Anyway, so we go into this place and it's empty or near empty, which is always a very, very bad sign, I find, in a restaurant.
When you can't get a booking anywhere else.
Yeah.
And this place is empty.
Yeah.
Alarm
and
bells.
It's a bit like going to a Chinese restaurant where there are no Chinese people in
That
it.
old
Always a really bad sign. So we go in there, and because we're starving and we're desperate, and we order our Pizzolo, and mine turns up, and it's got this tomato sauce on the top, which tastes to me, well, obviously is, because I've got good taste. It's raw tomato, it's tinned tomato. Mm-hmm. He's gone on Sicily, land of the tomato. Sicily is famous for its tomatoes.
Yeah.
They're really, really good, especially the ones grown at the foot of Mount Etna. And we weren't far from Mount Etna, only about an hour away. This pizza, this pizzolo or whatever it was, had this just out of a tin. So he comes up to us and asks, "Are we enjoying our pizzolos?" And I sort of make a sort of mare gesture, because I'm gearing myself up. I'm steeling myself for a fight. And I say to the family, "Fam," I'm going to complain about
I'm about
this.
to go off on one. Brace yourselves.
I'm going to, and they say, "Well, if you don't mind, we're going to leave the restaurant."
Very
and
sensible.
I said, "That's fine." Remember, this is Sicily, land of the Godfather, where people have their honour to stand up for. So you don't mess with the locals lightly. But I was not having this one. So I said, look, I thought that pizzolo was disgusting. The tomato was out of a tin. And instead of saying, I'm sorry, sir, you're absolutely right. I'm a disgusting piece of snivelling slime. How dare I, as a Sicilian, betray my land's guests in this way? Instead of saying that, he said, it did not say it was not tin tomato on the it just says tomato. Look, he said, pointing to the menu. And I said, yeah, I know it didn't specify what kind of tomato it was, but here we are in Sicily. I mean, I wish I could speak Italian. Wouldn't it have been wonderful? I could have spoken all this in Italian. So we had this stand-up row in front of the limited number of diners in the restaurant. And I said, well, in my country, if you serve somebody an unsatisfying meal that they don't like, you give them their money back. You knock it off the bill. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that. So we had this massive standoff, and I was trying to work out, feeling in my pocket to see how much change I had, because obviously I couldn't settle by credit card at this point. And luckily, I had enough money to sort of be able to leave without him feeling
without the mafia coming
after me. But it did not end happily. But the point about this was, this place had been given a good review on TripAdvisor, and I say, you lying, ignorant bastards. I don't know whether it was his friends being nice about it, or whether I think
you
it's
never
more
can tell. You
popular
don't know
stupidity.
what's gone into it. The last time I complained on TripAdvisor or chose TripAdvisor as the blunt instrument by which to punish a cafe, I'd been to a cafe in Worcester. I'd ordered a cream tea. Now, I love my cream teas. I do insist on putting the clotted cream on first, by the way.
In the Devon way.
In the Devon way. This cream tea arrived, a single scone, sometimes you get two, sometimes just the one, with a minuscule little scoop of clotted cream in a tiny, tiny little thimble of a bowl. And I was expected to make that go across two scones, or two halves of a scone. It was never going to happen. And I was thinking, well, I've paid £5.50, I think it was, for this cream tea. I'm not satisfied. I don't want to kick up a fuss in the cafe and say...
you did.
No, I didn't. I kept quiet. Thank you very much. I didn't want to blame the poor waitress. I didn't want to give her grief. I didn't want to upset my wife, who was with me at the time. And so I took to TripAdvisor later and I said, nice service, nice place, but absolutely ludicrously small portions on the clotted cream.
Where was this place?
In Worcester.
Right. Worcester, land of the cream tea.
Well, come on.
No, I know, I agree.
Tea.
I'm with you. You can get bloody clotted cream in the supermarket now, everywhere.
Absolutely.
Even
you
in
can
sort
get
of
it at
not
my
summer.
corner shop, yeah. No, and the cream tea for our American listeners is a wondrous thing. It's a scone, split in half, sometimes buttered. I like butter on it, but some people call that heresy. And then you apply lashings of clotted cream, which is a Cornish stroke Devonian cholesterol in a thick white paste.
Yeah. They know what they've had.
The Americans wouldn't know what a cream tea was. A proper cream tea they wouldn't know what clotted cream was.
It's like a corn dog, only completely different.
Like an English muffin.
Yeah, like an English muffin, right. Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, I had used it. I felt a little bit guilty about giving them this slating, but hopefully they'll have got the message,
Why? Why did you feel guilty? I don't like that in you.
No?
I think that's not very Delingpole, I would say. Because I tell you what, our other brother, Charlie, would actually...
He'd have had the place closed down.
He would have had the
bulldozed.
place.
Yeah.
That is how he operates.
Yeah.
He would have destroyed them. He would have bought up the company and then sold it to some Albanian mafia or something, just to punish them. Yeah.
So this whole leaving reviews thing, just to bring it back to the podcast, I noticed all the good reviews for this chap. And I was thinking, well, do I go in there and leave a bad review for his podcast? Do I say, I thought this podcast smelt of poo and I would recommend you avoid it like the plague? But I was thinking, no, that's a petty thing to do. That's the sort of thing that your critics do to your podcast.
They do. They do it without listening.
Not because they don't like the content, they don't think the interviews were interesting or stimulating enough. It's because it's James Delingpole's podcast. I will then take my spite out on him by giving him a 1-star review. And I thought, I don't want to bring myself down to that level, so I didn't do that bad review.
You need to be you need to be left wing to behave like that.
You do.
I think left wing people are so much more hateful. than right-wing people.
And yet they're the ones who accuse us of the hate. It's this whole sort of crazy upside-down world where left is right and right is left, and it actually is almost segueing perfectly.
That is so
another...
clever, and we didn't even. It's like we have the psychic bond, and I was reading mentally the complicated notes that you've made in your.
No, you couldn't even fathom out these notes. The handwriting is so tiny, and it's all done as bullet points.
Yeah.
But the point that I was going to go on to was how the left, this is me reading straight from my notes here, take ownership of words that quite deliberately have ambiguous meaning. Shall I give you some examples?
Yes.
Yes, Dick, give me some examples.
Yeah, Dick, give me some examples.
Okay. Far right, climate change, fake news, extremist, diversity, multiculturalism. Now, apart from maybe multiculturalism, which does kind of have a definition, none of those things are anything that can be completely pinned down as a fact. Another great one, of course, is racism, the word racism.
Yeah.
It's
just bad.
No one can come up with an adequate definition for what a racist is. And the left love these words because they can use them freely. Everyone accepts their meaning. Everyone knows what you're talking about when you say fake news. But actually, do they?
No one wants to be a racist. We saw that the other day, this extraordinary business with Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun. Did you read this story?
Yes, I did.
So he writes...
I tweeted about it.
Yeah, he writes this column, typical Kelvin Mackenzie. It's basically... Actually, I think it's more snobbish than anything else. He writes a column having a go at a Liverpool footballer for being thick as mince. Thick as mince. And this diatribe was illustrated with a picture of a gorilla's eyes and then this guy's eyes. And the guy is quite clearly white looking.
As white as white.
You would never guess that this guy wasn't white. But of course, luckily for this footballer, all his Christmases had come early because, as luck would have it, one of his grandfathers was black.
Right.
Therefore, he was able to play the race card. Therefore, he was able to get all the worst people in the world. I mean, this is the kind of story that all the worst people in the world get behind. So I'm sure Graham Linehan was onto this story like a rat up a drain pipe. They could have a go at Kelvin Mackenzie and The Sun simultaneously for being racist, even though I'm sure most people don't research the lineage of footballers before they...
No, I mean, depending on how far you want to go back, you are going to find something in your past that can be clung on to one way or another.
You're quite dark, actually.
I am. I looked at the photos that I took of us yesterday, and I could pass as a POC.
You have a touch of the
I am a
toothbrush
person
about you.
of colour.
Yeah. Your eyebrows are very... Well, are they?
You see, you wouldn't get this on Skype, would you?
Yeah, you wouldn't get this on Skype. No. Anyway, so I agree with whatever you were saying. Oh, yeah. I wanted to tell you, I was at the Chatham House the other day. You probably haven't even heard of Chatham House, and rightly so. It's a kind of lefty institution, think tank in St James's Square. And I was on this panel discussion about whether the media and about fake news. And there was a guy from CNN, senior editor, head of the London bureau. There was a guy from the New York Times, and a girl from Marie Leconte from BuzzFeed. Anyway, the point of the story was that I was saying, the thing about fake news is I first heard of it last year, and being used by the BBC, which was disgruntled in the immediate aftermath of the Trump victory. And it seems to me that fake news is the latest excuse of the left as to why it's losing the argument. In other words, the reason that people voted Donald Trump and the reason people voted Brexit is not because the cases for Brexit and Trump had any intrinsic merits, but purely because
those poor misguided people had been fed fake news.
They'd been fed lies by evil right-wing people. And if it hadn't been for that, Hillary would have walked away with the victory easily because everyone would have seen how wonderful it was. But because of the lies saying that she was a crook and ailing health and that she sold lots of uranium to the Russians through her foundation.
Fake news.
Yeah, it's fake news. Same with Brexit. It was that fake news on the side of the
bus.
coach, the bus. 350 million.
Yep. Fake news.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything delivered on the side of the bus is now officially fake news.
So when I made this point, I was thinking, well, this is a really good point, and it's so true, and I'm so right. But the guy from the New York Times and the guy from the CNN both disagreed with me. They actually believed, and this was clear from everything they said, they think that the New York Times and the CNN are both pure seekers after truth, ideologically unbiased. They really want to tell it like it is, and they don't
And
have
the
any
BBC
agenda.
believe this is themselves as well.
It's a weird world we live in. I make no bones about this. Is not a left-wing podcast. No one listening to this podcast thinks, oh, I wonder what James Delingpole's politics are. Oh, and he writes for Breitbart. Where are they coming from in this debate? We just admit where we are, and that's fine. As long as you admit you've got an agenda, then that's okay. It's when you put out news and you purport to be neutral, to be fair.
Well,
and
still,
balanced.
when you've got an official remit to be neutral, like the BBC, when we actually have to pay to be lied to like that.
And when they have a special side section of the BBC, who the BBC Trust, whose job is to ensure that it remains and still doesn't do its job.
No, it has secret meetings where they decide that there are exceptions to this.
Yes,
but they won't tell us what goes on in those secret meetings.
Exactly. That's where you need the internet to find out these things and expose them for the liars they are, which is why, of course, we don't trust the evil MSM. Yes. Anyway, shall we? This could be the end of the next section, because otherwise we're going to be totally bollocked by the wires.
I've got to get the potatoes in
and
soon.
the Easter egg hunt. We've got to do the bloody Easter egg. Sotting children. Okay, right. You're listening to Delingpole, the podcast with me, James Delingpole, brought to you by Breitbart, with my guest, Dick Delingpole. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlowe.
Let's get Bo Dietl in on the conversation.
We must stop the immigration until we're effectively able to know who's coming into our country and why you come to America. Do you love our freedom? Well, if that's the reason why you come to America and you want to be part of us, welcome aboard. If you want to come to America and disrupt the freedom and the great country that we have, you stay the hell out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to Delingpole, the podcast with me, James Delingpole, brought to you by Breitbart, with my guest, Dick Delingpole. Dick, what have you got for us in this final section?
Well, can I just open up section 3 with a lovely little quote from my wonderful colleagues. I work with two, well, let's call them youngsters. They're half my age, but Charlotte and Jack, and they listened to this podcast.
Big shout out to Charlotte and Jack.
Thank you. They describe our podcast, the one we do together, as like a shit right-wing Adam and Joe. And I was just so charmed with that, because I think that's a perfect...
I'm gonna actually put that on the advertising material, like a shit right-wing Adam and Joe. That's just what we are.
I think that's brilliant. I could happily live up to that.
You do. You are.
So the last section I want to talk about, I'm reaching for my notes again here. When I started taking notes, it was about 6 months ago that we last did this together. So it's sort of a lot of water has gone under the bridge. Since
I would say that this show is like, obviously longer than 6 months. It's like a really fine Burgundy, which is aged and is sounding really, really much better now. That it's drinking well, but in probably 20 years' time, it'll sound really good.
Well, let's hope so.
When I finally got my sodding production team doing this kind of boring shit.
So the final section, I've been dying to talk to you about this for quite a while, is my tank addiction.
That's a very healthy addiction.
Can't stop tanking.
It's better than another kind of rhyming with tank addiction.
Yeah, that
when you were younger, maybe.
The tank addiction. It started off with World of Tanks, which was a game I was playing on the Xbox, and you play it online with other players, randomly selected, and you're basically in a tank shooting the crap out of other tanks who are all manned by other people. They're not bots, they're not part of the game. They are people from right around the world who are logging on to play this tank game at the same time. Now, there's a few of these tank games out there. I stopped using the Xbox One when one of my Twitter followers put me on to a thing called War Thunder. Now, many of your listeners will probably be completely familiar with this, especially the younger ones. It's a free-to-play...
Don't have any younger listeners?
You don't have any younger... Of course you don't. I forgot about that. Your older listeners who enjoy online gaming.
Yes.
So it's a free-to-play online game. Actually, I think it's Russian. I think it's a Russian company, Gaijin.
You see, people slag off the Russians, but the Russians are pretty good, actually.
They brought us this game.
Yeah.
And so War Thunder, you're in a tank. You've got any nationality to choose from: British, American, German, of course, Russian. You start off with the crappier tanks of World War II, and
the French ones.
No, there are no French in there, and actually the French tanks were quite good. We could come on to that another time.
I say.
Don't diss the French tanks.
Okay.
The French were the best tankers around at the time. So you start off on early tanks, not quite World War I tanks, but early World War II tanks, and you work your way up as you get better. Honeys?
That was a tank, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was a little American thing. But it's very, very engaging. It's an incredibly realistic landscape. It's very easy to play. You're playing it with your mouse and your keyboard. You're moving around with the keyboard and you're aiming your turret with the mouse. You're looking down the barrel of your gun. You see it in sort of a first-person format.
So you can master it fairly quickly, because that's always my problem
you
with...
think you've mastered it until you move up a level to some rather experienced players, and you are getting blasted out of off the landscape within seconds of arrival on it. You get 3 goes, essentially, per game. The games last about 15 minutes, and I have become obsessed with it. I get home in the evening. Lydia thinks I'm off to do some work, but I'm having a quick tank.
It's a bit like the businessman's trip, isn't it? You know about DMT?
No.
DMT, I think, is known as the businessman's trip, because basically your trips are so short you can do them in your lunch break. And it's where you see the...
Oh, is this a drug?
Yeah, you see the little grey men.
Right.
The little alien people, and once you... It's a bit like being red-pilled, but on a kind of more psychic level.
Right.
What was the terrible new series done by the Wachowski brothers? Have you seen that?
No.
Oh. Just a brief digression here, because we do digressions. There's the people who did what's the thing with the red pills in it?
Matrix.
Yeah, the Matrix. The guys who did the Matrix have come up with a new series either on Amazon or Netflix or something, and it's all right, but it's really politically correct. So 2 of the characters in it are lesbians, and one of them is an older lesbian and one's the younger lesbian. And within the first 20 minutes, I swear to you, there's a scene with them having sex, not like lesbian sex like we enjoy in porno films, but they're having sex, and you see them, on top of each other, thrusting and stuff. And then the next thing you see is this kind of double-headed dildo thing
how did we get from tanks to double-headed dildos?
Being thwacked onto the floor in your face, as if to say, look, viewer, I dare you to be disgusted by this. I am challenging your heteronormative behaviour. And I think, fuck off, I do not want to watch a TV series that does that to me. They can go away. I don't care how good the special effects are, how beguiling the plot is. They can go away. Anyway, so that was a distraction. Back to tanks.
We did have this now the double-headed dildo, and I'm not going to get that out of my head. But,
although, talking double-headed dildos, there was another film. What's that drugs film? That's the really good drugs film I like. The really, really bleak one.
Jacob's Ladder?
No. You see, if I had my son here, he could be telling me this. It's anyway. We'll talk about that another time.
Right.
Carry on.
Okay. So last podcast together, we did talk about. There was a conversation as do British tanks have hatches underneath, and there was various other train spotterish tank detail. Now, in War Thunder, there is an amazing amount of train spotterish detail. So I've kind of went into it with the assumption that German tanks were the best. Okay, would you have gone in with that assumption?
I would have assumed, in my clearly terminal naivety, I would have assumed that the tank to go for would be the Panther, which is kind of an upgrade of the Tiger, isn't it? And or either you'd gone for that or a King Tiger or a Tiger Mark 6.
Well, you've got to work your way up to those incredible tanks, because that's high end stuff. So I'm not there yet. I'm at the moment the tanks I've got are a Marder 3H, which is kind of like a self-propelled gun, a Stug 3F, You know what the Stugs are? They're essentially a Panzer III body with no turret, but the main gun slung very low. They're an assault gun.
Yeah.
And the Panzer IV F2. So we're talking about sort of the micro changes within each stage of development. So, for instance, my Stug has good penetration, but it's got a slow reload rate and, of course, a low silhouette, not having a turret. So, I mean, this sort of thing makes a huge amount of difference in this game. But it being a Russian game, there is some debate as to whether or not the Russian developers have actually rigged it so that the Russian tanks come out better than they really had been in the war, which is an interesting factor. So you can take on Russian tanks.
So it's kind of psyops, really. It's propaganda. You are actually buying into Russian
mythology as to how good their tanks were in the war. But this debate rages. How good was the T-34? Was it brilliant just because it was produced in such high numbers, whereas the Germans with their over-engineered tanks couldn't churn them out quick enough because they were thinking of things like the comfort of the crew and rather than the reload rate and how good a gun that they could carry on that turret or how much protection they wanted to give their crew. So all of these things are factors in this game, and the differences between the American tanks. I think I'm currently on an M3A1 Stuart, and I've got an M3 Lee, which is that bizarre, very high slung thing with a low gun and a high gun. Yeah.
Yes, but can you confirm that all the Allied tanks, apart from possibly the Russian ones, were basically shit compared to the German ones?
Well, no, certainly that's not what comes across in this game. Naturally, being a game, they have to balance it. It's a bit like any sort of Warhammer-y type game where there's all these bizarre races like Space Marines and what have you. But actually, on the tabletop, they've got to be balanced. Otherwise, there's no game. Otherwise, everyone would say, well, if Russian tanks are the best, I'm going to be Russian. And no one would be Japanese or English, for instance. So they've got to be balanced so that you've got some sort of incentive to take on a nation that isn't perceived to have the best tanks.
Yeah.
But, you might have the fastest tank, but it's undergunned. You might have the best armoured tank, but then it's got no speed. So all of this stuff, and the detail it goes into. You can actually hit your enemy tank in the reticule, or you can hit it on the turret ring. You can aim for various points, and if you know that there's a weak point on the Tiger, that might be the turret ring, and you've got to hit that with, say, an HE shell rather than a penetrating shell.
It's a bit like top trumps, isn't it? You need to know all the stats
in that respect. If you knew all the stats, you would be a better player. And it's educational. You're learning about tanks.
Is that what you tell the wife when you nip off your...
my quick tank in the evening.
your quick tank.
And, of course, it brings the nations together because you're playing with people from around the world. You've got Russians playing it, and you've got all the European nations. And all of these players are knocking the crap out of each other in a virtual world. So
isn't that why we've got this problem with North Korea at the moment? Because their internet is so rubbish. There can never be any of that bonding with North Koreans.
They can't vent their aggression online. They have to actually literally fire missiles at each other.
That's awful. By the way, at the time of broadcast, there has not been a world war yet. We're kind of hoping that we
might be embarrassed by that. As it turns out,
we're going to look so out of date.
Mind you, we are so rural here. It'll be a good few hours before World War III actually gets acknowledged in Northamptonshire.
Yeah. So we're going to carry on talking about tanks. We've got about 10 more minutes of entertainment.
Well, I've got one or two topicettes to cover within.
I like topicettes a lot.
Well, I might have to reach for
I haven't heard them yet, but
no. But I don't know why I wrote this down. The 2016. Oh, this was part of the fake news thing, and the left using words that actually have no meaning. Just take this one on. This was the Labour slogan in 2016: "Working together for real change." Isn't that so New Labour?
That is.
It's utterly meaningless, but sounds kind of great. Now, who wouldn't that apply to?
Yeah.
Any political party could take that on. Lib Dems, UKIP, Tories, working together for real change. What a load of bollocks.
It's good. I think my slogan would be better living through chemistry. That would be a much better.
I think that one's been used, hasn't it?
Yes, of course it has. Yeah, I can't remember who by, but
it's probably a title of a Prodigy album or something.
Almost
like that.
certainly.
Yeah. So we could do the exciting world of own brand cereal.
We could.
How is the Kellogg's embargo going at Breitbart? I've heard Kellogg's are suffering from it.
Kellogg's are just like that yesterday's cereal brand. I don't think anyone in America is now eating. They just spit on Kellogg's. No,
Well,
they do.
You know my thing for
We should have shorted Kellogg's.
Yeah, before it happened. But is that not akin to insider trading?
Not really.
No?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, that's good. So my own personal crusade against Walker's Crisps. We touched on that last time.
Ah, yes.
Don't fund wankers, I think it was.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
of Gary Lineker.
I want that really ought to have taken off by now, because I think Gary Lineker has upset as many people as he's won over.
Oh,
The Gary Linehan of.
Well,
Oh my
it's
God!
Glinner. You know, I sometimes wonder whether they're not one and the same person.
Do you think people whose name begins with line are unusually disposed to be wankers?
There's a thought.
Yeah. Who else? Line.
Line dancing.
Line dancing. Yeah, line dancing is kind of shit. Actually, it's not. No, sorry.
You
Maybe
might upset our American
American
Sorry,
listeners. So
America.
we love line dancing. It's great. Yeah. Okay. Next on this. Oh, can we talk briefly about granola? About our wives
Well,
making granola.
this is one for the wives. It turns out there is so much to say about granola.
But I tell you how our granola thing started. When we realised that, first of all, these designer granolas started coming out in the supermarkets, and they suck you in a bit like heroin dealers selling heroin cheap.
Like the crack that you sprinkle on top of your cereal.
Like the crack you sprinkle. Yeah, exactly. So they get you hooked, and then they jack up their prices by about 200%.
The first one's free, and then you're hooked.
So all this artisanal muesli and stuff and granola, and you get used to it, and then suddenly, what the fuck? It's about £6 a packet now, isn't it? Or suddenly £5 a packet.
It ain't cheap.
The organic one. And that's the other thing. They make the organic one taste nice, even though organic is no better than ordinary, than non-organic. They make the organic one slightly nicer than the other ones, so that you have to kind of pay the premium.
Right.
So we realised enough is enough. We're going to have to make, or rather, what our wives said, enough is enough. We're going to have to make our own sodding granola. But,
And unbeknownst to the two of us, both of our wives have been off roasting their own nuts and berries and grains and oats and things like that, mixing it with the finest Canadian maple syrup and adding...
which is the problem ingredient, because maple syrup is really bloody expensive.
Yep.
And if you use honey instead of maple syrup, it's not as nice.
Goes grainy, does it?
It's more about the texture.
Right.
It gets a nasty, hard kind of... What are those nasty crunchy bars that get caught in your teeth with the peanut brittle?
Right. No, I don't
It's
do
like
that.
that. It's not, as you get older, particularly, and as your teeth get more vulnerable. So, whereas if you use maple syrup, you get a lovely kind of a crunch, but not a sort of toffee-ish quality,
Right.
which is what anyway.
But yeah, so the wives have been exchanging notes on little tips.
As women, wives should. While the men go out to kill the beast, make the podcast,
Make podcasts,
the
hide
wives,
Easter eggs, roast potatoes.
the wives talk about
exchange
recipes.
notes on recipes.
This is the kind of world we should live in. And yeah, if you went out on Twitter now and you tweeted that, people would think you were sexist or something.
There are going to be people out there who will actually call us misogynists for this very conversation.
I hate it. I hate this world. I so hate this world. Yeah. Anyway, we've got time for one more item.
Well, we'd never actually covered my reenactment career at all.
Yeah, but isn't that a whole other podcast?
It is a whole other podcast.
I think we'll get them excited.
Just to say that, well, we know what I do.
In the
I
future.
do French, Napoleonic, and the new thing being World War One. I am a poilu.
And I'm wearing your hat and smoking
the
your
picture,
pipe.
The picture I took. I never actually managed to make a point about that. I suddenly saw you using it one day, and I thought, I took that picture in front of my larder with my helmet on, my Adrienne.
Do you think you should actually charge Breitbart?
I should actually take credit for it at
you
least.
should sue them.
Yeah.
Because you know Breitbart is now bigger than Pornhub.
Is that
Yeah,
so?
absolutely, and we're very proud of that fact.
That's brilliant. Great comparison.
Yeah, it is. We are porn for right-thinking
Porn for
people.
right-wingers.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, you carry on.
Well,
The
no,
last-
so you did look very fine in my Adrian, because of course we know who wore the Adrian, being the iconic French helmet of World War One. They were the first to wear steel helmets in the First World War, ahead of the Brits and the Americans. They were all wearing soft hats until that came out, and then they all went over to helmets. But the Adrian is slightly more stylish. It's got a ridge along the top, and they carried on wearing it right away in various forms, right away up into the 60s, and the riot police and what have you. But of course, Winston Churchill favoured an Adrian helmet, which he'd been given by the French, and so it's kind of a little reflection on that. You and your, the Englishman in the French helmet, he's not shy of wearing it because it's a great little item.
It's funny, isn't it, what they could get away with in those days? That he was, I think he was a lieutenant colonel. He went out to the trenches in order to recover his credibility after the Dardanelles disaster. It must have been quite a big deal for a politician of his seniority to go out to the sharp end, because I don't think he needed to do it, but it
didn't do him any harm, did it? Although it quite clearly could have done. One shell would have ended. It would have certainly changed history,
as it did for lots of people.
Lots
of people had their history permanently changed, or if they were Rupert Brooke, they died of whatever it was, dysentery or something.
Is that what? He wasn't shot or anything?
I don't think it was. It was for children. World War One. It wasn't a place to be.
And yet they've made a game of it. Battlefield 1.
I like the way you bring everything back to. And how is Battlefield 1? Would you recommend
Battlefield 1 has been very well received. I have never played it, but apparently there's an over-reliance on unlikely machine guns. Now, I know a little bit about World War One machine guns, and they were very rarely fired from the hip as you charge into battle. And the tanks, they've speeded them up somewhat. They've made them rather more effective than they were. But of course, they're making a video game. But Battlefield 1 is a thing. But you don't just sit in a trench and get bombed, because that wouldn't make much of a game.
Well, you go on raiding parties, I imagine.
It's meant to be very, very
with
fast
Koshes
and very,
and
very good. But I don't think anyone should be fooled into thinking that's what World War One was like. But, real life games, it's never really quite going to match up, is it?
I can hear the sound of wives sort of shutting doors and thinking, where are the
Those
men? Why are they doing?
Again. It's nearly 1 o'clock. We're eating at 2.
Right, okay, let's
Spuds
get
in.
going. Thank you for listening, dear friend. You're listening to me, James Delingpole, on the Delingpole podcast, brought to you by Breitbart, with my guest, Dick Delingpole. Lots of love. Bye.